What happens when the person you've been mocking turns out to be your boss? This team learned that lesson in the most humbling way. It started as an ordinary morning, showing no signs of the surprise ahead. The sun shone brightly over downtown Dallas, and the streets buzzed with activity as people went about their day. Among them was Elijah, a delivery driver who had seen it all. He wasn't flashy or loud, but there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. That morning, he had an important delivery to make own that led him to one of the city's most upscale restaurants, Bel Andrea's Fine Dining. Known for its luxurious atmosphere and somewhat pretentious reputation, it wasn't the kind of place Elijah usually spent time in, but duty called. His truck rumbled into the restaurant's back alley, the designated drop-off point for deliveries. Even here, there was an air of exclusivity. Towering silver doors marked staff only stood firm, almost as if challenging outsiders to enter. Elijah grabbed his clipboard, adjusted his gloves, and carefully stacked boxes of organic produce and specialty seafood onto his dolly. As he pushed the load toward the entrance, he caught the faint sound of laughter from inside a tone laced with ridicule and superiority. He knew that kind of laughter well. With a slight shake of his head, he dismissed it. He was no stranger to being judged or underestimated, but he wouldn't let it affect him. Steady as always, he knocked twice on the steel door and waited. When it opened, a young chef in a crisp white jacket looked at him as if he were something less. Inconvenience behind him, two other staff members peeked out, one stifling a chuckle, and the other rolling her eyes. Deliveries are supposed to come. Earlier, the young man snapped his tone, dripping with annoyance. Elijah calmly held up the invoice. "I'm right on schedule, sir. Fresh seafood from Gulf Coast Imports and the fine organic greens. You requested," the chef waved him off. "Whatever. Just bring it in. And don't block the kitchen." Entrance. As Elijah pushed his dolly, inside he noticed more staff turning, their heads to glance at him, their expressions ranging from amused to condescending. Someone muttered under their breath, "Guess the company sends just anyone to places like this." It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. That mocking, dismissive tone that said more than any insult. Could Elijah kept moving, unloading the boxes carefully, his hands steady, even though their words lingered in the air like a bad smell. But Elijah didn't flinch. Not yet. He knew something they didn't, and it was only a matter of time before everything changed. As Elijah maneuvered the dolly deeper into the restaurant, he couldn't help but take in the surroundings. Bel Andrea's Fine Dining was as extravagant as the rumors. CL fled. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow on marble floors so polished you could see your reflection. The open kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, and every corner of the place screamed wealth. But beneath the pristine surface was something far less polished. Elijah noticed the way the staff moved, quick and efficient. Yes, but with an air of self-importance that didn't sit right. These weren't people proud of their work. They were proud of their hierarchy, and right now Elijah was at the bottom of it. "Make sure you're not blocking the chef's station," barked a woman wearing a sharp black suit. She didn't even look up from her clipboard as she walked by. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied, his tone polite but firm. He didn't mind following instructions, but he could feel her gaze linger, scrutinizing him as if she were searching for a reason to dismiss him. Nearby, two waiters stood at the edge of the dining area, folding napkins and whispering. It didn't take a detective to figure out they were talking about him. Every now and then they'd glance his way, barely hiding their smirks. "What do you think? 5 minutes before he messes something up," one of them said. Snickering, Elijah ignored them and continued with his work. Years in this business had taught him that people like this weren't worth his energy. He focused on unloading the boxes neatly onto the counter by the walk-in fridge. Still, the comments kept coming. You'd think someone delivering to a place like this would at least dress better. Another voice chimed in. Elijah glanced at his uniform. It was clean and pressed, practical for someone hauling boxes all day. But to these people, it wasn't good enough. It didn't matter. He wasn't here to impress anyone. As he finished the first load and turned to head back to the truck. He passed by a group of line cooks near the grill. They too paused their chatter to take a long look at him. One of them, a tall man with a smirk that practically screamed trouble, leaned over and whispered loudly enough for Elijah to hear. Betty couldn't even afford to eat here, let alone step through the front door. The others laughed, and Elijah felt his jaw tighten slightly. He had plenty of practice letting things slide, but this was starting to push the limits. Still, he kept his composure and made his way back outside for the next load, but the worst was yet to come. Inside, the mocking laughter grew louder, and Elijah could feel their eyes on him like he was some sort of spectacle. Elijah returned to his truck, loading the second set of boxes onto his dolly. The morning heat was creeping in, and the sweat on his brow mixed with the dust from the alley. But as he pushed the dolly back toward the kitchen doors, he could still hear the faint laughter echoing from inside. They hadn't even tried to lower their voices when he re-entered the kitchen. The head chef, a sharp-featured man named Damien, stood by the counter inspecting the ingredients Elijah had already delivered. He turned his nose up slightly as he picked up a crate of seafood. "Is this the best they could send?" Damon muttered just loud enough for Elijah to hear. Elijah paused for a moment. "There's an issue with the quality. I can call the supplier." And Damon cut him off with a dismissive wave. No, just drop it off and leave. We've got more important things to focus on." As Elijah began unloading the second batch of boxes, he couldn't help but notice the way Damien carried himself. The chef spoke loudly, directing his staff with an exaggerated authority, as if he needed everyone in the room to know he was in charge. "I swear," Damon said, turning to one of the servers, "the standards are dropping everywhere. Look at this guy. Do they not teach professionalism to delivery drivers anymore?" The server, a young woman with a forced smile, glanced at Elijah, but didn't say anything. Instead, she nodded at Damien and busied herself setting up the nearby dining area. Elijah kept his head down and finished unloading. He wasn't about to let their words get to him, but he couldn't ignore the growing irritation. It wasn't just the comments. It was the blatant lack of respect, the assumption that he was less than simply because of his job. As he moved to stack the empty crates, one of the kitchen staff called out to him, "Hey, delivery guy, you missed a box." Elijah turned confused because he was certain he hadn't. The staff member pointed to a crate sitting near the door. Working as he did, Elijah walked over and bent down to pick it up, only to realize it was empty. Another round of laughter rippled through the kitchen. "Just messing with you, man," the guy said, slapping his knee. "Relax a little." Elijah didn't respond. Instead, he placed the empty crate back down and finished his work without another word. Inside, his patience was wearing thin, but he reminded himself of why he was here. He had a job to do and a point to make, even if they didn't know it yet. When the delivery was finally complete, Elijah handed the signed invoice to Damien. The chef didn't even look at him as he scrolled his signature across the paper. "You can go now," Damon said curtly, not bothering with a thank you. Elijah paused for a moment, his eyes steady. "Have a good day," he said evenly before turning and heading back to his truck. But just as he reached the door, one of the waiters muttered under his breath, "Yeah, go back to wherever you came from. That was it." Elijah stopped in his tracks, his hand resting on the door handle. For a brief moment, the room fell silent. All eyes were on him. Elijah turned slowly, his gaze meeting the waiter's. There was no anger in his expression, just a calm confidence that immediately silenced the smirks and whispers. "I came here," Elijah said, his voice steady, "to deliver something you clearly need more of." Respect. The room stayed quiet as Elijah walked out, but the real surprise was still waiting, and it was only a matter of time before they realized who he really was. Elijah leaned against the side of his truck, taking a moment to catch his breath. The delivery was done, but the weight of the morning lingered. He'd been in similar situations countless times, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way they all seemed so comfortable in their assumptions, so blind to the possibility that he was more than what they saw. He glanced at the restaurant's grand facade, the name Bel Andreas etched in elegant gold letters above the entrance. It was surreal, really. Just a few weeks ago, he had signed the final papers that made him the owner of this place, a bold step in his growing empire of fine dining establishments. But Elijah's journey to this moment wasn't one of privilege or shortcuts. It was built on years of sweat, sacrifice, and a relentless drive to prove himself. He grew up in a small town in Louisiana where opportunities were scarce and expectations for someone like him were even scarcer. His parents worked tirelessly, instilling in him the value of hard work and integrity. Elijah had started as a dishwasher in a local diner when he was just 16 back then. He'd watch the cooks and servers with fascination, dreaming of the day he could create something bigger, something extraordinary. Over the years he climbed the ladder, moving from kitchen staff to manager, and eventually he saved enough to open his first restaurant. It wasn't flashy, but it was his. And from there, his vision only grew. When the opportunity to buy Bel Andreas came up, Elijah didn't hesitate. He knew it was a risk, but he also knew what this place could become under his leadership. The restaurant had a reputation for exclusivity, but Elijah saw potential beyond the surface. He wanted to turn it into something more, an establishment where everyone felt valued, from the guests to the staff to the people making deliveries. But the transition wasn't going to be easy. Elijah had chosen not to announce his ownership immediately, opting instead to observe the culture firsthand. He wanted to see how the staff operated when they thought no one was watching. What he saw this morning only confirmed what he suspected. Change was long overdue. Elijah climbed back into his truck and made a few notes on his tablet, preparing for the meeting he had scheduled with the staff later that afternoon. He'd kept the announcement of his arrival vague, telling the manager to gather everyone in the dining room at 3:00 p.m. He thought about the chef Damon and the way he carried himself, how quick he was to judge and dismiss. He thought about the waiters, the kitchen staff, and the manager who barely acknowledged him. Elijah didn't feel anger toward them. He felt something deeper, a sense of disappointment in how easily people fell into patterns of prejudice and disrespect. By the time he drove away from the restaurant, Elijah had made up his mind. The meeting wouldn't just be about introduction. It would be about setting the tone for what Bel Andreas would stand for. Moving forward, respect, humility, and equality weren't just buzzwords to him. They were the foundation of everything he believed in. And in a few short hours, they were about to find out exactly who Elijah was and why he was there. The clock struck 3:00 p.m., and the staff began to gather in the main dining room of Bel Andreas. Fine dining. Some looked curious, others annoyed. Damien leaned against a table, arms crossed, his expression a mixture of irritation and boredom. "What's this about?" he muttered to. "One of the servers were slammed tonight, and now we have to sit through a meeting." The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man named Greg, stood near the entrance, looking unusually nervous. He had been told to assemble everyone, but even he didn't know exactly why. All he had been told was that the new owner would be arriving today, and this meeting was mandatory. As the staff settled in, the doors to the dining room opened, and in walked Elijah, still dressed in the same uniform he'd worn that morning. For a moment, the room was silent, the staff exchanging confused glances. Damien let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Elijah walked to the center of the room, his calm demeanor unchanged. He could feel the tension, the UN-spoken questions hanging in the air, but he didn't rush to explain. Instead, he let the silence linger for a few moments, meeting their gazes one by one. Finally, Greg cleared his throat, breaking the awkward quiet. Elijah, what are you doing here? This meeting is for staff only. Elijah smiled faintly, his voice steady but firm. I know, Greg. That's why I'm here. Damon rolled his eyes. Look, if this is about the delivery earlier, can we just move on? We have actual work to do. Elijah turned his attention to Damien, his gaze steady. You're right, Chef DeMan. This is about the delivery, and it's about a lot more than that. DeMan raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, Elijah continued. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Elijah Reynolds, and as of 3 weeks ago, I'm the new owner of Bellandria's. Fine. Dining the room fell silent again, but this time the air was thick with shock. Damon's smirk vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. The servers exchanged stunned looks, and Greg's face turned pale. Damon finally managed to say, his voice almost a whisper. You're the owner? That's right. Elijah said, his tone even. And before you say anything else, I want you to understand something. This isn't about me flaunting my title or putting anyone in their place. This is about respect. He paused, letting his words sink in. I spent the morning observing how this team operates. I saw the way you treated me because you assumed I was just a delivery driver, and I want you to think about what that says. Not about me, but about you. The man opened his mouth to respond, but quickly shut it. Again, the servers looked down at the floor, suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. Elijah continued, his voice carrying a quiet strength. You judged me before you even knew who I was. You made assumptions based on how I looked, what I was wearing, and the job I was doing, and that behavior. It doesn't just hurt me, it hurts this restaurant. It hurts the culture we're trying to build here. The room stayed silent as Elijah's words hung in the air. He looked around, meeting their eyes. Again, every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, whether they're a guest, a staff member, or someone delivering the ingredients that keep this place running. That's the standard I expect from every single one of you. For the first time that day, Elijah saw something new in their expression, shame, and as uncomfortable as it was for them. It was exactly what they needed to feel. The silence in the room was almost palpable, every staff member grappling with the weight of Elijah's words. Damon shifted uncomfortably, his arms no longer crossed in defiance but hanging awkwardly by his sides. The servers avoided eye contact, their earlier smirks now long gone. Elijah took a step forward, his tone softening but losing none of its authority. Change doesn't happen overnight, but if this restaurant is going to thrive, it has to begin with how we treat one another. It starts with accountability and respect for every single person here. Elijah scanned the room, ensuring his words resonated with everyone. I didn't begin at the top, he continued. I've been in your shoes, working exhausting hours, doing the tasks that go unnoticed. I've scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and hauled boxes just like I did this morning. And let me tell you, those roles matter just as much as any chef or manager in this room. Without them, this place simply wouldn't function. A heavy silence fell over the room as his words carried more weight than any scolding ever could. Letting the moment sink in, Elijah finally spoke again. So, from today, we're cultivating a new culture built on mutual respect, where baseless assumptions and judgments have no place. And if anyone feels they can't align with that, then perhaps this isn't the right team for them. The room remained still, a few staff members murmuring quiet apologies. Finally, Damon, the young chef, hesitated before speaking. I'll never meant to be disrespectful. Elijah raised his hand, cutting him off. Actions speak louder than words, chef. If you truly want to change, prove it. Show me and the team that you're here to grow. That goes for all of you. He stepped back, his usual calm demeanor returning. We all have our biases, and we all make mistakes. What truly matters is how we choose to move forward, and I believe this team can do better. With that, Elijah turned to leave, but not before offering one final thought. Respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost you everything. The weight of his words lingered long after he was gone. For the first time in years, Bellandria's fine dining felt like it was on the path to becoming something greater. Moral of the story: never judge a person by their appearance or role. Everyone has a journey you may not see. True leadership isn't about power. It's about respect, accountability, and lifting others up. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more eye-opening narratives. See you in the next one.